Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Process Podcast. In the room today, we have myself, Ed Haynes. I have Liam Carmichael to my left. To his left, we have Tamarind Robinson. And to Tammy's left, we have Charlotte Thompson. Hello, everyone, and welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
How are we doing today? Are we generally doing well? Are we generally not doing so well? Or are we just kind of in the middle?
Thriving.
Thriving?
Thriving.
I'll go thriving as well.
Yeah. Oh, the old thriving.
Thriving and thriving weren't even options, but great to hear that you guys are all thriving. I too am thriving as well. We're going to get into it because we got loads to talk about today. Today we are going to be talking about lifestyle essentials, and for many folks that may not mean nothing, but it's something that we talk about a lot here at Coastal on the Process Programming. We've recently put out something on social media talking about kind of the pyramid, or I would guess like the hierarchy of importance when it comes to sustainable health and wellness, and at the bottom of that pyramid is where lifestyle essentials come in. As you move up the pyramid, different things come in, things like nutrition, training, etc. But this essentially is the 6 things that we see as the most fundamental things that people need to be putting time and energy into if we are thinking about living long and prosper. So has anyone got anything else they want to add in terms of like a bit of an introduction to what we mean by lifestyle essentials?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just like a set of behaviours and guidelines that we believe at the Process Programme and that we should all be striving towards. Like, doesn't matter what the goal is or who you are, where you live. I think that's just, we can all agree that it's a certain of behaviours or guidelines that are going to push you towards your goal.
And why should we be having this conversation? Like, why does the whole world not agree that these are the most fundamental things that they should be doing?
I think in a way it comes back to our mission, right? Our mission is to educate and teach people how to live a healthy, sustainable life, with the key word being obviously sustainable. So I think that someone could live an okay life potentially without those things. And something that was a really great point of discussion, I think this morning when we were doing some brainstorming, was actually Liam mentioned it, was, we don't want someone to just have a long lifespan. We want their health span to be as close to their lifespan as possible. And when we say that, we want them to have functionality and be able to do cool things and move well and, feel good up until really old age. Something that came up for us was like, he was asking us the question of, what do you want to be like when you're 90? And I think prior to a lot of the conversation and the research that we had done today, for me, honestly, I was like, I don't even know if I want to get to 90 because of what I've seen. Like, my last couple years at school was helping in palliative care, and seeing it was scary. Like, people had just let themselves go, or like there wasn't much awareness about it. So if we can be the people that can like hold that torch to kind of create and evoke change, that would be incredible.
I love that concept of health span versus lifespan. Yeah. But why are we having to have this conversation? Because we have this conversation a lot with people, and we have to always essentially bring people back to the basics. Like, these are what we call the essentials. Yep. What's happened to the human race where we have forgotten how important these things are?
Yeah, I think just with day-to-day life, it's very easy to let these things fall by the wayside. I think if you go to like times before when we had as much technology or the amount of work we have on our plate, like, we naturally had stress management for the environment around us and what we needed. We naturally had food hygiene and things that we needed to do in order to survive and be healthy to survive, right? We naturally had a circadian rhythm or a sleep cycle that matched what was happening in nature. So over time, that obviously has changed quite a lot. And now we have a lot of artificial things blocking that natural cycle. And I think, to be honest, it's just really easy to forget the importance of it. A lot of us jump into training and jump into nutrition and jump into all this other stuff. But really at the foundation of it all, you're going to have so many cracks in your building if you're not laying that foundation properly. So that's why we're bringing it up.
Yeah, I think Tammy said it really well. Like, I think we're getting so caught up in our everyday life, like we're forgetting to bring it back to the basics, and people are constantly getting guided down wrong paths of quick fixes, and they're wondering why they're not seeing progress, and they're wondering why this is playing up, and then at certain times something else crops up, and they're not taking a step back and looking at the macro picture of life and looking at those foundations that not one's more important than the other. We want looking for a balance across the board. And it's just about laying those foundations to be able to elevate everything else rather than just getting so consumed in everything else that we're doing or other people, and just kind of looking internally.
Yeah, nice. I think as well, the world is just, it's an increasingly busy world where we're constantly putting more and more on our plates, trying to do more and more in our lives. And when we're trying to do more and more in our lives, we're trying to find shortcuts to allow us to still achieve the same result by doing less ultimately, or essentially doing less of the important stuff to allow us to do the other things like careers, like juggle multiple hobbies and interests, like sleep less and do more during the day. And I think as well, leading into what you just said, Lotte, like, the rise of different industries like technology, pharmaceuticals, all these people are proposing options to help us be more efficient with things like sleep, how we can hack circadian rhythms, how we can do less movement but still be as effective. When you think about the general human being who is a consumer, if you're not educated in these areas, and I think when I think back to certainly my school days, like there wasn't conversation about the lifestyle essentials really, like the importance of nailing these basic things. As a consumer, we get pulled all sorts of different directions. Magazines are telling us to do one thing, and TV is telling us to do another, social media is telling us to do another, and it is really, really confusing. And so we go down routes of like supplementation or sleep aids, and I'm sure we can come up with loads more. And it is just confusing. And I certainly have been pulled down those different rabbit holes many, many times in my life, and have constantly reminded myself, okay, just got to go back to the basic things that have worked for however long human beings have been on this planet. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's really good. I think it's the same with training, like a lot of what's coming out now in the sciences are like, actually, we've just overthought it and made it way too complicated. So just strip it back to the things that we know work and do them consistently.
Yeah.
You don't need fancy supplements. You don't need X, Y, Z. It's just like, you just need to dial things back a little and create sustainable and healthy lifestyle choices and behaviors.
Yeah. And you can never cheat the natural cycle.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think just echoing what basically everyone has said is like, we love training here, right? But we know that training is literally, if you're training 5 times a week, 90 minutes a day, that's actually quite a lot of training. But in the grand scale of things during your week, it's probably only like 5% of your total week, right? You got to think about the other 23 hours of your day. If you're nailing these basics, and I'm sure we're going to go through them now and talk about our own experiences, but if you're really nailing them, well, that's what's going to allow you to get your PRs and make your gains, etc. It's through the basics. It's not actually through the training, right? So
awesome. Okay, let's just quickly talk about what our 6 lifestyle essentials are. We're gonna now address these in this order. The first one is circadian rhythm. The second is sleep. The third is hydration. The fourth is stress management. The fifth is movement. And the 6th is food hygiene. So we'll start with circadian rhythm. Tammy, I'd like you to have a crack at actually just defining what we really mean by circadian rhythm. And I'd love to hear from the room your experiences with circadian rhythm and kind of where you're at now. So Tammy, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. I guess in its simplest form, the circadian rhythm is almost like our biological clock, where there are a set of processes that are happening within it's approximate, but like a 24-hour window, right? That is going to be things being cued. And some people probably mistake sleep to be the circadian rhythm, which isn't really necessarily true. It's part of it, but there are other things that come into play as well. So it's things, from things as simple as like your hunger and satiety cues, like when you're hungry and when you're not. Feeling full. It's
light exposure.
Yeah. So your sleep-wake cycle based on light exposure. It's other things that happen.
Menstrual cycle.
Yeah, with your cycle, exactly, your reproductive tracts and things like that. It's just things that should be happening within your body should be going in some sort of routine and cycle. That's what our body craves.
Cool. Let me just jump in there as well to add on top of that. So I think when we look at, and everyone's different, and we have to always respect that and remember that. But I think if we were to say like, what would the ideal, most optimal circadian rhythm look like? Well, what we should really be doing is waking more or less kind of when the sun is rising. As the sun is climbing up into the middle of the sky, where it's typically at its peak at around midday, our cortisol, which is our natural adrenaline, should be rising with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially, as the sun starts to dip down towards the end of the day, our cortisol should naturally be falling with that as well. And as cortisol eventually towards the end of the day starts to dip, we have an increase in melatonin, which is basically, you know, our sleep hormone, which is now saying, okay, now the light is now down, the sun is down, this is a signal for us to now sleep. So that would be kind of what we would say would like be a healthy cortisol curve. Now, obviously, when we look at in this day and age, it doesn't really look like that. And there are so many things that contribute to that. Number one, if we can appreciate that cortisol is essentially like the onset of stress in any form is going to create spikes in cortisol. Obviously, things like caffeine and stimulants also does the same. So what we already have is, because we're generally stressed out as hell, our cortisol is kind of spiking and dropping constantly throughout the day. What we have a lot of people doing is like stressful things in the evening, artificial light, which basically means when the sun has gone down, we still sit in a really bright room and our body doesn't know what time of day it is. And so rather than cortisol dropping, cortisol at nighttime is still higher than it should be. And melatonin, we kind of get into bed, and that's why we can't really sleep, because our cycle is just kind of out. And there are so many more things that kind of contribute this to basically throwing us out of our natural cycle. And, you know, the long-term effect of this is that, you know, a cortisol curve that is skewed further and further away from optimal is that we kind of, you know, it used to be termed like adrenal fatigue. I think people more refer to it now as kind of like adrenal dysfunction. You just basically, your body's not working as optimally as it should be. And, you know, that can get to a kind of stage of like chronicness where you have to do really drastic measures to try and get back things to normal. And I think, you know, the further you go into a stress cycle where your cortisol curve is off where it should be, the longer it may take to get you back there. Anyone got any thoughts to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think it's also just important, like you said, it's not necessarily just cortisol. There are so many processes that we could name that do the same thing. So I guess regularity and routine is pretty much what we're trying to say we need.
Awesome. Let's go off that then. So the concept of regularity in routine.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, my first question to the group is like, how regular and routine are your days today?
I'll go, because I feel I'm pretty consistent. I feel like, I think that I have got good rhythm. Like I generally wake up at the same time. I generally eat at the same time. I normally come to work at the same time. I normally train at the same time. I will generally have my post-protein workout shake at the same times, and I'll go to sleep at the same time. Like my lifestyle is just set up so that it is very routine driven. Now, on the flip side, when I used to work as a flight attendant, when I worked for Emirates, that was the total opposite. And I craved so much to have some sort of routine, like talking about like hunger signals and stuff. Like when you're flying through so many different time zones, well, your body clock is so off. And I can tell, well, from my personal experience, I felt absolutely terrible.
So would you say that your years as a flight attendant has now brought you to this point in your life where you crave regularity and routine?
That's why I value it so much, because I've been on the other end of the spectrum where I had zero routine. And your body does crave them. I mean, we're creatures of habit. Like if we go back to, like we're talking about circadian rhythms and cortisol and melatonin, that's how the body should be functioning. So your body will naturally try and lean towards that. And when you're not giving it, well, it's giving you signals that you're doing something wrong, right?
Yeah. Tammy?
Yeah, I guess if I was to talk of my personal experience, my thing that led me to my routines and the things that I have now is definitely, you know, my mental health stuff, right? Like the downfall of that was that I hit probably like an all-time low, and it made me really think, okay, well, what do I need to change? And without knowing much about what we're talking about today at the time, I think it was like something that I established. I was like, if I keep stuff similar and keep stuff the same, I feel good. Like that's without knowing any science behind anything, just like this is what I feel I need, which is great to have the self-awareness. But now to put all those pieces together has been pretty cool to be like, wow, your body does a pretty good job of telling you what it needs.
Yeah.
What was a catalyst? What made you suddenly think about that potentially being an important contributor to your mental health?
I think it's when you start to have, or for me, when I had like more frequent bipolar episodes, or when things were terrible, the thing that would always get me back on track was having a set schedule, a set routine, you know, going to bed and waking up at similar times, having my clients booked in at similar times. Like once I could keep everything, at least I felt, I guess, like under control, I felt like I had like things good. So I wouldn't say there was like this catalyst, this real big aha moment. It was more just like accumulatively, without, again, knowing. I had built a library of knowledge enough to know that this feels good, so I'm going to keep doing this. And that's carried forward into everything. And now I'm just a robot, but that's okay.
7:30 p.m.
Yeah, sorry, guys, I'm out.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Lotte.
I think for me, very similar to a lot of people, like, you know, it takes time, it takes experience to figure out your routines. And like Tammy said, like, your body is very good at telling you what it needs and what it wants. I've definitely kind of been guilty of having a long time just figuring out that routine and maybe being in someone else's routine and knowing that it's not necessarily like healthy for me, but you kind of have that survival state that you're in. I definitely think I know when I'm in a really good routine because I'm feeling good. Like, I wake up before my alarm. I don't need my alarm. There's a certain time of day that I get tired. I need to go to bed. In terms of my everyday life now, it's pretty solid. There's a couple days in the week where maybe I have earlier clients, so it's a little bit of out of routine. But like Liam said, like, you have food at the same time, kind of training at the same time every day. I have a much, you know, more sustainable schedule now that I'm able to go home, decompress, and I leave like my windows open, so when the sun's going down, I can let that like natural cortisol go down and kind of thing. I definitely are still figuring out the path on things like weekends and stuff when I don't have in terms of my work routine in there, but I'm definitely getting better, and I think I'm more aware of it because the other habits are much more dialed in. So it's, you know, the routine is getting there for sure. I'm definitely not as consistent as these guys, but being surrounded by consistent people makes me a lot more consistent.
Lotte, you're much more normal. That's why.
we're actually the weirdos.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Nice. I mean, I would say I'm very much like all of you. I've been a stickler for routines for a really, really long time. And I just know that when I deviate away from them, everything kind of falls to the wayside.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a choice I think that we all make because we value something in our lives that we want to show up 100% to. And I think I can totally understand a lot of people experience it when they're in a job they don't like or they don't have a job at the moment. Well, if you go on holiday, like a lot of people's routines fall to wayside because you don't necessarily have something you have to turn up to in the day and have 100%. But I certainly have realized, you know, in my career doing what I do is that, you know, I just acknowledged over the years that this is something I really want to put 100% energy into. And in order to do that, I need to have my life routine set up so I can do it. And I know that the moment I slip off and my rhythms start to go out, you know, dinner starts to slip an hour later. You know, my light exposure stays on longer. I'm working later at night. A lot of those things, when they happen, everything kind of falls apart. And so I just know, especially with age as well, you know, the more every year I get older, the importance of rhythm becomes just a little bit more important. And when you're younger, you can be a little bit more resilient. You can afford to have more deviations away from your rhythm, and it doesn't affect you. But I feel like you're all like, you've got this smile that you just want to burst out laughing as soon as I talk about being old.
35's coming in hot.
Exactly.
His mum
Masters
still
next year.
thinks he can make it to the games there.
She
That's
does.
pretty cute.
Thanks, Mum. Very, at least there's one believer out there.
Yeah. But
So,
I think it's important to point out, like, for a lot of people listening, you know, they kind of, I get it a lot with my clients, you know, you have the time to do that, you know, it's in your industry to do that. But what we spoke about at the beginning when we were introducing these things, we're surrounded by a consumer culture. We're surrounded by temptations to throw us off this rhythm. That's actually something quite natural to us. So when you're talking about like artificial lights and everything, you know, I know we've spoken about turning lights and screens off, you know, whether that's 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours before bed. It's giving yourself time and that self-awareness to let those things happen. Whereas I think there's this constant buzz around us in society that in order to stay a part of society or things like that, like, we need to be on these things all the time. And it's just tempting us outside of things that is so easily inside of our control.
I think, to go on top of that, something and a conversation I've been having a lot with my clients and even with the staff members here is just how valuable actually setting aside time for yourself is.
100%.
Not necessarily to, you know, just reflect and journal and do those things. That's not necessarily what I'm saying, but like prioritizing yourself and your health makes you a priority, and it makes your values and your goals important. It shows yourself that. So we may not have the time, but we make the time because it's important to us.
So
and
then
it's
you can
important that
show
we
up.
teach people to make the time, because by making that 5, 10, 15, 20-minute piece of time for themselves, they'll have so much more to give to the other aspects of their life. But it's by experience, right? You can't, you can, like, what is the saying? You can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink it. Yeah.
I think, like, essentially what we're all talking about here with, you know, why we become so diligent with our routines and our rhythm is because, like, we want to be able to control essentially our lives as much as possible. And, you know, I think the thing that most of our clients will come to us with, the struggle with, is like, but I feel like I can't control a lot of things in my life. There's a lot of things that are outside my control, like the time I start work, when I have to have my lunch, when I can do my training. You know, a lot of things that are actually, you know, we have to be able to adapt to what we can actually do. And I think this is where I often talk about the bookends of your day. It's like, you know, there are 2 control points that most of us in the world actually do have control over, and that's what happens immediately after we wake up and what happens immediately before we go to bed. And so I know personally for me is that if I can nail those 2 parts of my day, it generally sets me up for success. So I can then roll the punches a little bit, you know, get pulled away from what I would regard to be optimal. But I know that if I really invest in nailing my morning and nighttime routines, I'm generally going to be quite successful. And so, you know, that's often, I guess, asking out to the table, like, is there any other strategies or helpful pieces of advice that you could give to people who love the concept of having rhythm and routine, but are like, I'm just not sure how I can make this happen?
I think, generally speaking, it's just having a really in-depth conversation with them. Keep asking questions. I mean, you know me as a person, I'm just a question monster as it is, but I think it's kind of helpful in our industry because it gets me to get to the deeper, I guess, reasoning behind what's happening. You know, eventually when you question someone enough, they end up giving you the answer of what they think they could do, right? You know, the whole idea of this is where we're trying to teach people to self-govern, and through that, they're creating their own path of that change, right? So I guess the first thing to discuss with them, if they feel like they don't have control, is, well, why don't we just look at what you do have control of? And then they'll say it. You're like, cool, I like that. That's great. So out of those things that you can control, what do you think that we can make a small change with, right? I think more often than not, people just bite off more than they can chew. And that's where they feel, I guess, disappointed, because then they experience failure in a way, right? Which, if they have a coach guiding them along it, they can be like, hey, it's not failure. It's like feedback. That was just the wrong choice. Let's go back to the drawing board and think of something different. But start small. Like, that is my biggest piece of advice to anyone. You know, someone who's like, I am really struggling to, I don't know, what do we want to say? I'm really struggling to get to bed at a certain time, or I'm really struggling to get enough sleep, or I'm really struggling to do this. It's like, all right, well, what is the action? Like, the goal is to get more sleep, right? Then, okay, let's half that. What would that look like to you? And they say it. Okay, let's half that again. What would that look like to you? And eventually you get down to, like, what they could do today to make that happen. They're like, I'm just going to set an alarm to tell myself when I want to try and get to bed. That's already a step in the right direction. And if they do that for a week, they're going to constantly be reminded. Then the next week it's probably going to happen. Then the week after that, they're going to be like, wow, I've already achieved the success with this. What can I try next? So I think it's being able to have a conversation to get someone to recognize what they can do in a really, really little way, build success, and then go from there.
Yeah.
And I think this is why we talk so much on the importance of our check-ins.
Yeah.
Like those daily check-ins. It's like, that's why we do these things. That's why we're trying to create self-awareness. By you just sleeping an extra 10 to 15 minutes over 2 weeks, well, you're probably going to start seeing some small changes when you're doing your check-ins. How do I feel? Oh, I've been feeling great. Why is that? Well, you've been sleeping only 10 minutes more.
Yeah.
And like we always say, these are just guidelines. They're not set in stone. We're just giving you information for you to try and work out what works for you. Because what works for me and what works for Tammy probably not going to work for you. You've got to figure out something that's actually going to work for you and sustainable.
Yeah.
Can you do this thing that you're trying to do now for the next 10, 15, 20 years? Because that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah. Set yourself up for success. Like, don't bite off more than you can chew, but also understand that if maybe you don't achieve that goal in that one day, like it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, one day isn't going to completely throw you out of whack. Or who knows, like you might have a baby and your whole, you know, routine is completely out of whack, and that's okay. And being, you know, self-aware and forgiving and kind to yourself, and not putting so much stress that everything needs to change at once. It's just moving that needle like a millimeter every day just to get us to the end goal, because we're all striving for the same thing, but like Liam said, it all works in completely different ways for us.
Yeah, I love what Liam said, is this is not like a one size fits all approach ever, right? It's, you are your own scientist of your life. You know, you have this hypothesis of what you think is going to work. You test it. You gather all the data. You look at the results. It's either it really worked or it didn't. And that's okay. If it didn't, go back to the drawing board, test the next hypothesis. If it's working, you don't need to change it. Just keep going with it. It's, it's pretty cool.
And I think this is going to be a running theme for everything we talk about. It's like everything you guys just said. And I think the last one is like, we are a result of what we consistently do the most.
Yeah.
And if that means that 5 days a week you nail things, and on a weekend you do slip up, like, well, the majority of the time you've actually been successful. So, you know, that multiplied over 5 years is a lot of success in my eyes. So, you know, don't beat yourself up over it. Just be consistent, and that's what will reap results in the long term.
For sure.
Love it, guys. Good start. Okay, well, that's circadian rhythm, and we put that first because essentially circadian rhythm governs everything, and everything we're about to talk about now is going to kind of somehow fall into circadian rhythm and have a contribution. So let's talk about the next thing, sleep. Now, we talked about sleep a shitload on this podcast. We've done podcasts talking strictly about how you can improve your sleep. We've talked about how you can improve our sleep. So I want to just get straight to one question, which is to ask you honestly, on average, how many hours are you in bed? Number 2, how many hours do you roughly sleep? And the third one is, what is your quality of sleep actually like? The reason I want to put this out there is because I think a lot of people look to people in the fitness industry like us and think that we are like gods and goddesses of sleep. And we close our eyes and we wake up 9 hours later. Personally, it never happened to me. But I would love to actually hear from you guys. Like, genuinely, what does your sleep really look like? Liam, kick us off. Liam actually is a god of sleep, so this is a bad example.
Bad
So, you know,
person to start with.
You know, when people ask like, oh, what's your superpower and stuff? I literally
Sleep.
think that sleep is my superpower. Like I feel like I'm a really good sleeper. Like I'm in bed for like 9 hours and 40 minutes in total. I go to bed at like 8. My alarm goes off at 5:20. So that was bad maths actually.
Terrible maths.
9:20 probably. Actually, is it 9:20?
Yeah, 9:20.
Yeah, 9:20. I'm asleep probably, I would say, for about 8:45 of that, maybe 9.
And do you wake up in the middle of the night?
Very rarely. Like, yeah,
So
it's
you
going to
genuinely
happen.
close your eyes and then you literally open them up. You're like, oh, that's 9 hours later.
Yeah, honestly.
That's incredible. Now, can I ask, when you were working in the airline industry, was your sleep like that?
No, it was definitely not like that. But I think that, again, going off what I experienced, like it was like literally sleeping like 3 hours. You had to get up, or even you were sleeping on like airplanes at some point, like just 2 hours or 40 minutes. And we had this conversation actually yesterday, and we're talking about, like, you know, that feeling where you're that tired, you physically feel sick. I've been in that situation many times. So that's why I now gravitate so much towards these basics, and my rhythm is really good, and my sleep is so important to me.
Just let me one more question for you.
One more.
If you let's say you have a few drinks on a weekend and bedtime maybe is 3 hours later than normal, how was your sleep on those nights?
I'll still generally get the same quantity, because that's what happened. We had a few drinks on Saturday, went to bed later. I still get total quantity. Was the quality the best? Probably not. It was a bit hot.
So you mean you opened your eyes once in the night?
No, I was like tossing and turning, woke up, I was a bit like rusty or dusty, as we say. But yeah, I can definitely feel it. If my bedtime is different, like I go to bed later, my sleep quality definitely deteriorates.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's so cool. I've always I have never been the person that's like, I've slept for 9 hours. Like, I genuinely don't think in my entire life that's ever happened. I can't think back. Maybe on a plane once. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure I'd had something to make that happen.
Which we won't talk about this podcast.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. We shouldn't be doing that, guys.
So Tam, on average, how many hours are you in bed?
Okay, so hours in bed, I would say 8 to 8.5. Pretty consistent. Hours of sleep, pretty varied. I would say my average amount of sleep is about now 7:20 to 7:40. But that's an improvement, right? I think for me, I know as a person I operate pretty well. 7 hours for me is like good. If I get less than 7 hours, not good. If I get 8 hours, it's a pretty magical day. Like, it doesn't happen too often. And that's even with like good sleep hygiene and good sleep routines and all of that. Like, I remember actually I was worried about it when I started like not getting that much, especially knowing I'm reading all these things and it's saying that I should have between 7 to 9. And why am I not getting 8? Does that mean there's something wrong with me? But there was this cool little thing that made me feel better about it. I feel like I'm justifying it, but it was a sleep specialist talking about it. And he was like, look, there's this thing that goes around that says like 8 hours is the number. He was like, just think about it like this. It has a graph and it goes up, and that's the point. They're going to be people that drop to the side of that, and that's what their body needs and what it operates on. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. So anyway, all I'm trying to do is justify my actions because Liam's sitting next to me and he gets 9 hours a night and I get 7 hours 20 to 7 hours 40, but I feel great. But to go on that, very good quality generally. Actually, I sleep through the night most nights. Actually, getting up to pee once is pretty normal. And I know that is because I drink close to bed. I haven't stopped that habit yet because I like it.
But it's also because your day's set up like that. You've got quite a late training session.
Yeah.
Right. So time you actually hydrate.
Yeah.
Like you're drinking up until you go to sleep, right? Almost.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, as an example for today, we're going to finish this podcast at like 5 or just after, which means I probably won't be home until like 5:30, 5:45. I'm going to be in bed with lights out at 7. So yeah, not much of a turnaround.
The sun's still up then.
Can I just ask both of you, when you, maybe not you, Liam, Tammy, when you wake up in the morning, you know, like when your alarm first goes off.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't. You don't wake up with an alarm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to get there one day. But when you wake up, like, how do you feel? Are you energized? Are you groggy? Are you like, I could sleep for another hour?
I get you. Yeah. It definitely is dependent. So for me, I'm not like Liam, where if he has a late night, he'll wake up later. Like, I wake up at the same time every day. My body's just like, it's time. That's not always how I feel, obviously, because of it. More often than not, I actually feel okay. And I know it from the first time I kind of like wake up. I like open my eyes and lay there for a little bit. And I'm like, should I be trying to sleep a little bit more? And then I start like, I have this thing. My head starts playing songs and I'm like, I'm up. So then I get up and I go to the toilet and I like start getting into my day. Generally, yeah, I feel pretty good. And I know on the days where I don't, I've learned much more what that feels like. I'm slower to get out of bed. Like, my actual processes of doing stuff in the morning are much slower as well. I'm less inclined to want to do a quick like bit of work before I come in. I'll definitely try and stretch out the time of like chilling out before I come in.
Nice. All right, Lotte, hit us. What's your sleep like?
My sleep's pretty good. I think on average I sleep about 8 hours a night. I think the time that I go to bed maybe differs between like 45 minutes to an hour. It's either like 8:30, 8:45 or 9:30-ish. Actually, 9:30 is quite late right now. And then I wake up around between 5 and 5:30 every day. But I'm very much the same as Tammy. Like, even if I have a late night, I'll wake up at 5, 6 every morning, no matter what time I went to bed. My quality of sleep's pretty good, actually. Even though I've been kind of moving in different houses and stuff a lot recently, my sleep quality is actually amazing.
That's good.
Yeah, if I wake up once maybe, but that's at about half an hour before I need to wake up, so I'm almost, it's like at 4:30, something like that, and I'm like, okay, well, I could get up now, but I'll easily just have like a 20-40 minute doze and then get up. I actually wake up before my alarm, other than when I have to wake up at 4 a.m. for my 5 o'clock class.
So what we've heard about the circadian rhythm, I feel like I should just not be doing my job. So
Basically, we all need to quit, go on holiday for the rest of our lives, and we'll be sweet.
Yeah.
Nice, Lotte.
I also find it hard to nap. You know, like a lot of people are like, oh, I love a good nap and stuff. I just have a lot of energy during the day, but when it gets to about 7, I'm like, ugh.
You are a ball of energy. It's fun. I like it.
Really?
Yeah.
Am
I really?
You also never look tired. Like, you know, when
No.
sometimes you'll be like, maybe even you've had a few drinks and you've only been asleep for 4 hours, you literally look exactly the same.
Yeah.
My eyes are barely open, and
Yeah.
I look horrible, and you
Yeah.
just look exactly the same.
Yeah, I think
Do you guys
that's
notice
my
that?
superpower, maybe.
Probably is.
Maybe that's youth
It's
as
because
well.
you're old.
I've always looked like shit after a bad night's
But
sleep.
I think my superpower can actually come in handy because on like the odd occasion, and it's much more rare now, if I do have a late night and I'm talking like early hours in the morning, I'll only have about 3 hours sleep, and my ring will tell me like pay attention, and I'm like, gold, let's go.
That's awesome.
It's weird. Yeah.
Okay, Ed, fill us in.
So I mean, I'm genuinely, when I think back to like even teenage years, I never have ever been a good sleeper. I think a big problem was like getting a computer in my room when I was like 14, and that honestly like messed everything up, and I just didn't develop good sleep habits as a young teenager, and I think those are genuinely continued throughout my life. I'm very diligent with my sleep routines. Like I talk about it all the time. You guys know that.
He's actually midway through one of them now.
Yeah. We started 5 minutes ago. John, can you turn
The,
these lights off, please?
artificial light needs to come down.
But I would say on average, I strive to be in bed for 9 hours every night. That's
Yeah.
always my goal. So I
Yeah.
normally get into bed right now. It's about 8:15 and my alarm's at 5:45. And I've got one of those light alarms. And I'll normally wake up probably at around 5:20, 5:30 when the light starts to come up. But I would say if I was to average it out over the last like 10 years, I generally sleep well for the first half of the night. So from usually about 8 till 1 is generally pretty good. And then from 1 till 5 is generally, I'd say pretty shit. But I would say that I toss and turn a lot.
Yeah.
And I pretty much always have like around 1 to 2 will wake up and feel like I'm actually awake here. And sometimes I'll be up between sometimes like 10 minutes to sometimes like an hour or more. And I'm not stressing about it. There's times in my life where I would stress about it and, you know, try and do everything. But now it's like, it's all good. Like, it's just I've become so accustomed to it that I'm happy to just lie there. Sometimes I will just read a book to help me go back to sleep. But generally speaking, like I have a lot of REM sleep. I have a lot of dreams in the second half of the night, not many dreams in the first half of the night. But I mean, I seem to be able to function on it. Like, all right. Like I do know that for me, it's like, no, you don't.
Questionable.
Yeah. So I would say of the 9 hours in bed, I'd probably say like I sleep between 7.5 to probably 8.5.
Do you find it hard to get to sleep?
No, not really. I do if I skip out. So my nighttime routine is like, you know, I have a very strict lights out routine.
How long we got?
Now, not long. But I mean, generally speaking, like lights will go out at least 45 minutes before bed. Like electronics, phones, computers, that goes away about an hour before bed. I have to journal, stretch, and meditate in a dark room.
We talked about that last week because you asked me like something, because I've got some routines as well. But like for me, if the time is to go to sleep and I've not done my routines, I'm okay with that. I would rather sack them off and try and get into bed. But you, on the other hand, you have to do those routines.
Even if I've been out to a rave and it's 2 a.m.
When was the last time that happened?
I'm just imagining you sitting there with like your head just moving everywhere.
He's like pulling over.
If I come home from a rave at 2 a.m.
How'd you get that bump on your head? Well, I was meditating, pissed.
I can hardly open my eyes. I genuinely still have to go through that routine.
That's crazy.
So there's so
Wow.
many nights where I'm like, I'm so fucking tired. I don't need to do that routine. Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
hit that pillow and go to bed.
Yeah.
And I'm not even. There's not even anxiety around it. I'm just like, yeah, this is just one of those nights. I don't need to do it. And
Yeah.
I'll like either I'll fall asleep and wake up an hour later and be like, then I have to go and actually do all of that at some point anyway. It's ridiculous. So now I don't even bother trying to cheat the system. I'm just like, no matter what time, you still got to do it. So yeah, that's my sleep history. And like I think my sleep, but I've never, as a kid, I never valued sleep.
Yeah.
You know, like I was always trying to shortchange sleep and do as least little as possible. When I started, you know, Coastal Fitness 14 years ago, I tried to shortchange sleep, and I think like I had a lot of health issues come because of that.
Yeah.
Like even all my injuries, I genuinely relate so many of them to just being under recovered because I wasn't
sure.
sleeping enough.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think it was important, and just never correlated like ill health, you know, like colds, viruses,
Yeah.
sicknesses. I would get like styes in my eye all the time at school.
Yeah.
And then now I think back, I'm like, because I was fucking on MSN Messenger till like 4 a.m. in the morning, and then waking up at 7 a.m.
Hey,
and being
babes.
like, yeah, all good.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to find my girlfriend. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, I've just had just a strange relationship with sleep, but I definitely
Yeah.
say like I still function and feel pretty good if I hit that, but it's just like now I just don't stress. And the same thing for me, it was Matthew Walker and Andrew Huberman did a podcast, and Matthew Walker, you know, when he released his first book, Why We Sleep, you know, he talked about like how important I think like 7 to 9 hours is, and like quality is really important. I think the whole world, who were not good sleepers were like, shit, what am I doing wrong? Like I need to change something. And then he came out with a second book and actually said, all right, I kind of owe the world a bit of an apology. Yeah. And said like, you know, sleep does not have to be that. Like even he was like, and as soon as he said like, I'm not that great a sleeper, I was like, okay, maybe I can stop stressing about it. And actually I was like, you know what, I do actually function quite well on my current sleep routine.
I think what you've said is really interesting. And it's kind of been like a common theme with what we've all said is like, well, we don't stress about it. I think actually a lot of people put a little bit too much time and stress into it, and that's actually what ends up being detrimental.
I was one of those stressors for years.
Because if we think about it, like we're meant to de-stress if we're trying to achieve something like that. I'd actually be really interested to hear your wind down routine. I didn't even know that was a thing, Mr. I have a superpower and it's sleep.
Yeah, generally it's just like, I mean, the first thing is obviously turning my phone off. Like I'll try and have my phone off maybe like 45 minutes before going to sleep. Then it's obviously after the phone, then it'll be the TV, and then it's just having darkness in the room. Like we'll turn off all the lights. Yeah. In preparation for going to sleep. I also wear an eye mask, which I actually think since I started wearing the eye mask, that's what's gave me my superpower. Like it honestly feels like, because it's just pure darkness. Pitch black. Yeah. And it's kind of like when you put it on, your brain now knows, right, okay, now it's time to go to sleep. Because you know if you're in bed, and even though it's dark, you can still open your eyes and you can still see some light coming through. But with that eye mask, game changer.
So I have this weird habit of like putting like a blanket or like a t-shirt over my eyes, so it's not like pressed against my eyes like an eye mask, because I feel really like suffocated by it kind of thing. But I just put like my blanket over my eyes and I just lay on my back, and now
does it go over your mouth as well?
No, nothing over my mouth.
So just a separate, like a blindfold that sits in your eyes.
It's actually like my baby blanket that I had when I was a kid. And I'm staying at my sister's right now, but she has a weighted blanket and like her actual duvet. So good. No, but you know what is weird? The first time I slept in it, I felt so uncomfortable and I felt like I was just being pinned. Yeah. And not into that. But now I'm actually like very comfortable with it.
Now you got used to it.
Yeah, I got used to it. But when you talk about like your upbringing with sleep and everything like that, I always got encouraged to dial in very good sleeping habits. Like as a household, we always like go to bed, this, that, and the other. We never had electronics in the room and stuff. But I was a really anxious sleeper. I hated sleeping by myself. I hated the dark, like classic like childhood nightmares. But mine extended until like 12 years old. And I just couldn't sleep in a room by myself. Whereas now, if there's anyone near me or anything like that, I just need to like be in my own zone.
I really do think there is a lot to support like childhood habits with sleep and how that manifests in later life. Like the more and more clients I've spoken to with children, the more people I've spoken to about their sleep history, you know, generally a lot of bad sleepers in adulthood were also bad sleepers or just didn't value sleep or didn't have sleep routines as children. So, and if you're listening to this and you have kids, I do think it's a really important, well, number one, like now we acknowledge and know the importance of sleep, but like build those habits and, you know, build value around the importance of sleep will last that person a lifetime, I think.
Yeah.